Hey, welcome back to Polysthetic. In this video, I'm going to show you my workflow for creating animated voxel characters from Magica Voxel to Blender. This is the same procedure and set of techniques that I'm going to show you that I use to develop my voxel adventure minifigures and Santa's Lo-Fi Christmas band videos. Let's switch over to the screen. Alrighty, so I'm going to assume that you already have your characters ready to go, and you can put all your models on one Magica Voxel file and separate it out later in Blender. That's fine. And if you're using a different voxel software, I assume the procedure will be similar. Right here, we want to go to the export button down here, and we're going to export it to OBJ. Now in Blender, go to File, Import, Wavefront, OBJ, and load your OBJ. Now click here on the Viewport Shadings button to see that the material has indeed loaded. If you're curious how this works, go to the shader editor. You can see that it's created a principled VSDF material for you, and it's loaded a PNG file. Now what this does is it maps the geometry to a single color. So I'm going to hold my cursor here and pull this out. Look at the image or the UV editor. Now let's say we take a look at geometry here. You can see that all the UV points have been scaled down to a size of 0 and concentrated on the center of that color. Now be mindful here. If I move, shading will change slightly, and that's because the interpolation mode here is set to linear. If you don't want that color smoothing, change it to closest, and here you see that the colors do indeed snap. Okay, so I'm going to work on this pirate character. So I'm going to click on the Z here so we can get a top view. I'm going to click on toggle X-ray. Alternatively, you can press Alt Z. I'm going to select all the geometry here. I'm going to press P to separate this into a separate mesh. Separate by selection. That's it. I'm going to delete the rest. Now I'm going to bring the origin of this shape to the bottom of this character's feet. So click on Options and affect only the origins. Let's look at him front on. Before I move this axis, let's turn on snapping to vertex. I'm going to shift click on edge center as well so we can get the middle of the geometry. So now with that character selected, I'm going to press G to move this axis, press X to lock it along the X axis, and I'm going to hold Control. So you can see that the cursor is snapping to certain points. This is the midpoint. Press G again, press Z. So there's a vertical snap. I'm going to snap it to any of the bottom corners there. Press on the X. Press G, so we're looking side on now. And we're moving along the Y-axis. I'm going to select the middle of his foot there. There we go. I'm going to switch this back off. Click on this arrow. I'm going to reset the location of the character back to 0. Now there's a few things we need to do before we can animate this character. The first issue is when Magica Voxel exports the models, it doesn't weld the vertices together. What I mean by that is if we select a face and we move it, you can see that the geometry is detached from the remaining geometry. It's easy to forget this. Best way to do this is tab into your character's edit mode. You can press A to select everything. Press M to merge the vertices by distance. You can see here that 560 vertices have been removed by the merge operation. And you can tweak this merge distance if you need be, but you don't need it in this case. Alternatively, if you don't like shortcuts, you can go to Mesh, Merge by Distance. So now if we select one of the faces and move them, we can see that all the geometry is connected correctly. Now the next step is going to be a bit tedious, and that is correcting the topology of this model. Let's say the knee of this character is somewhere up here. Well, if we create a joint here, there's actually no edge for the vertice to bend. So this whole mass will only shear. So you need to introduce additional geometry, edges and faces, where you want the geometry to bend. Now the first thing I'm going to do is select everything, go to face, and select tris to quads. So you can see we've removed a bunch of triangles, but where this doesn't happen, we can individually select them and press F. Now the idea here is to keep your geometry as square as possible. So for example, I select these faces, press F to melt them together, and then I press K, which is the knife tool, and I cut across here from this vertex to this vertex. So you can see here in this example that I've modified the topology to be as smooth as possible. So here we've got 5 vertices, and I've broken it up into 2 triangles and 3 quads, which then collapsed into a triangle and 2 quads here, and then connected it in such a way that it goes back to the single quad here. Now this isn't too necessary because there's not going to be too much movement in this location, but it's just as a demonstration of how to clean up the topology. It doesn't have to be perfect, really. Now let's go to our knife tool here. I'm going to switch off X-ray, and here we're going to set angle snapping to relative. So relative to the geometry. I keep the increment at 30 degrees because I just want 90 degrees. I'm going to click here. You can see that it's a perfect right angle to the geometry. Just like that, I've got a clean cut around this arm. And we can turn off the snapping. And just cut a line from this vertex to this vertex. And this quad is fine to keep as it is. So this is much cleaner than the previous geometry that Magica Voxel created for us. Okay, so don't spend too long on this topology. Once you've got everything pretty much neatly into neat quads and triangles, what you can then do is introduce some loop cuts where you need some joints. So for example, if you want the knees to be up here, you can just add a couple of cuts there. And because you've cleaned up the geometry a little bit, it'll just cut right through correctly. But of course, wherever you need, if you find that you can't create a loop cut neatly around here, you can just of course correct it just using the knife tool. But yeah, in general, the more square your geometry and the less elongated, for example here, your triangles are, the easier and smoother the animations are going to be. Okay, let's take a look at rigging this model. Now there's an easy way and there's a hard way, and I'm going to show you the hard way first, so you can understand what's actually happening when you're doing it the easy way. You can just press Shift A, click Armature. Let's click on Object Data Properties, Viewport Display in front, so we can see where the bone is. Let's go Tab, so we're in Edit mode. I'm going to scale this bone down and move it upwards. G to move, Z to lock on the Z axis. So we'll call this waist. Then I'm going to select this node here, press E to extrude a new bone, press F2 to rename. Now I'm going to call this hip. I'm going to add .L for the left hip. Remember, he's facing us. I'm going to extrude another bone, press Z to lock it to the Z axis, rename, knee.L. Extrude again. I'm just going to call this foot.L. Similarly, from the top, I'll call this neck. Extrude again. I'm going to call this head. From the neck here, I'm going to extrude this shoulder here. Shoulder.L. Let's move this bone in place here. I'm going to call this elbow left. I'm going to extrude along the y-axis for the hand. Of course, you can add as many bones as you need to make the rig as complex as you need. I'm just going to keep it as simple as possible. Now notice here that these left bones on the left, or his left. Now make sure we're facing the character. Right click and click Symmetrize. Here you'll see that you've created the right hand side equivalents. But we have to correct the right hand here. Ideally, of course, you would have created better models. T-pose models that are better suited to rigging. There we have it. Now I'm going to take a model here. I'm going to put it underneath the armature. Press Hold Shift. And here you see that now it's parented to the armature. That way, as we move, the model moves with it. On our model, let's add a modifier of the type armature. And we're going to select this eyedropper to select the armature object. Cool. Now notice here it says bind to vertex groups. So if we go into pose mode, notice the character isn't actually rigged yet. The way we do this, we select our character here, go into object data properties, and here's where you add your vertex groups. So for example, let's select the head. We rename this head, vertex group, go into here, weight paint. Now here, what you can do is paint the geometry where you want it to be the head. Set our strength to 1, blend mode to mix, and here we can select all the geometry that we want to be affected by the head node. Like this. Now, an easier way to do this is to go back to edit mode and select the geometry we want to be captured underneath the head. I'm just going to press Ctrl plus to expand the selection as needed. Okay, so I've selected the whole head. We go back to weight paint. Here we can click on weights, set weight. And here we've assigned the weight of 1 automatically to all the selected geometry. So now if we go back into pose mode on this armature, now as I rotate this head, you can see that the whole head rotates in the model. Press RZ and he's turning his head. It's a bit crude, but you understand the demonstration. And you can see that this is quite tedious, because now, to rig this entire model, you're going to have to add a vertex group for every bone, and then select or paint on the weighting of that vertex group. So Blender does provide a shortcut for this. First I'm going to delete this head vertex group. I'm also going to pull this out, so hold Shift and clear the parent. Now what I'm going to do is select the model first, Shift select the armature, I'm going to press Ctrl P, and here I'm going to select armature deform with automatic weights. If we go back to the model, you can see this is already set, but here we can see that all the vertex grips have been assigned correctly. Well, approximately rather. So if we go back into pose mode of the armature, see that everything has been rigged. Cool. What if we want to add eyes to this character? First, let's create a new mesh, the type cube. Let's tab into it. Press S to shrink it down. Okay. Now I'm going to press G to move it, the mesh. Just move it up there. Then we're going to the cube here, modifiers, and we'll add a mirror modifier. There we go. Let's pull this back into a Z. Cool. And then what we'll do is apply this modifier. Let's tab back into object mode. Just apply that there. Okay. So how do we get these eyes to respond to the armature? First, select its mesh as well. So shift select, so we've got both of them selected. Then press Ctrl J. What this does is it joins it to the mesh. So now these two cubes are part of our character. First, I'm going to select these front two faces and press Ctrl L. So it selects all the linked geometry. Alternatively, you can go select, linked there. Now here, let's switch over to the UV editor. And you'll notice how the UV is spread out across all of the colors. I'm just going to press A here to select all the faces. Press S to scale them and make it 0. Just type 0. I'm just going to move that here so he's got brown eyes. Alrighty. Now, let's go into our armature. Tab into it. Here I'm going to extrude another bone locked on the y-axis. I'm going to name it eyes. And I want this to be centered around the eyes. So when I scale this up and down to simulate blinking, it scales from the middle. So I'm going to select that bone. I'm going to press Y to split this bone from that, so this one can move freely. Alternatively, you can go to armature and then split. I press G to move that there, around the center point. Yep, it's already renamed. So let's go to our character, tab in, and we've already got the eyes selected here, so we can add a new vertex group. We'll call it eyes. Add eyes. Then go into weights paint mode, weights, and set weight. Okay, and this means that they're red, so the weight is 1 for these faces in the eyes vertex group. Okay, so if we go back into object mode, select our armature again, and we'll select pose mode. Here we can select the eye bone, press S to scale, Z to scale along the Y and Z axis, and now we can adjust the height of the eyes. We can do a similar thing with the mouth as well. Let's go to our character. We'll select this inner ring. The way I did that was holding Alt and clicking near the edge. This selects the loop. Create a new vertex group. We'll call it mouth. Go into weight paint. And I'm going to press Shift K to assign the weight to those faces. Now let's go back to object mode. Tab to edit our bones. I'm going to select this bone. Press Shift D to duplicate this bone. Z downwards. And I'm going to call this mouth. Now, If I go back into pose mode, you can see that I can control the mouth by scaling that bone. So I hope you can appreciate why I showed you how to do this the hard way first. Because then you can, when you understand intrinsically how Blender does it automatically, you can more quickly modify the armature, edit and add bones to the armature. There is an important thing to note here. When we move the head now, you'll notice that the eyes no longer move, because we added that geometry later. So what you need to do is, we can go to our eyes here, click select, then we can go to the head and assign them to the head as well. So here, we've still got them on the eyes, but they also respond to the head. Notice how there's still some offset between the eyes and the head. That's because this eyes bone and the head bone are no longer connected. And so the eyes split their influence between the two bones. To correct this, we can go into edit mode, select the eyes and the mouth, and select the head last, shift select, press Ctrl P, and here we'll make a parent but keep the offset. So you can see we've got these dashed lines now. But when we pose the head, as you can see, the bones keep their position relative to the head. Awesome, and that's really all you need to know for rigging. Let's take a quick look at animation. So if we go back to the timeline, now usually with bones, what you'll want to do is change the rotations. However, you'll only want to change about one axis at a time, so it's better to switch these over to XYZ Euler rotations rather than quaternions, so you get a better idea of what's happening. Here, for example, if we want to create a simple walking animation, let's go to the side here. You can rotate this bone like this, say 30 degrees, make that bone 30 degrees. Let's change this back to XYZ Euler. We can just insert this single keyframe. It's best to make this on frame 0. Okay. Here we can do the same. Now let's go to frame, say 30. We can then make this 30. Okay, 30 as well. Then we insert single keyframe again. Insert single keyframe here. There we go. See, we get this very rudimentary walk cycle at the hips. So let's select this bone as well, change it back to XYZ Euler. There you go. And as you can play around with it, look at a proper animation sheet, see how to animate the bones correctly. But you get the idea. Now, if we want to mirror loop this, a quick way to do that is, let's pull out a new panel here. Let's go into the graph editor. And here, let's look at the Z Euler rotation curve. What we can do is add a modifier of the type cycles. And here we can say repeat mirrored. Same goes with the knee. Add modifier, cycles. Here we're going to, after mode, repeat mirrored. Now I'm going to copy this modifier using this button. I'm going to go to the right knee and paste that there. On the right foot and paste that there. So we can make our animation now 60 frames long. And just like that, we've mirrored our animation. we hide our armature, you can see our model has been animated. Very rudimentary, but if you add bones, if you clean up your topology and you exaggerate the movements a lot more, you get a very good looking animation. But hopefully you get a good idea for the process of animating one of these models. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, please put them in that little box down below. And if you have any requests for further Blender tutorials, please let me know as well. I'm happy to make more of these. And I'll see you in the next one.